Yes, as Yunten said, my name is Kathy Wesley, and I guess you could say I work here because I'm part of the staff of this amazing class for KTD Monastery. So we're going to be talking this evening about Bodhicitta, and I'm going to be sharing some information and give you some good book recommendations, and hopefully we can begin to learn more about this topic. So I have encouraged Yunten to use we're going to use the prayers that have been assembled for this class. And we're going to begin our class this evening with an intention, which is to be of benefit to all sentient beings. And then we're going to also say and speak our intentions through the various prayers. We'll start with the Mahamudra lineage supplication, and then recite the taking of refuge and the engendering of the Bodhisattva mind. So I think, yeah, we'll begin with that. And you can join in your heart and in your mind, and dedicate this particular session to the freedom from suffering of all sentient beings. I'll use the whatever melodies I can remember. Okay, here we go. Oh, doje chan chen te lo naro dang marpa mi la chu je kam po pa du sum she ja kun ken karma pa che shi chun che ju pa zin dang Dritatsasam Paden Drupasok Sablam Cha Cha Che Lang Nye Pe Nyame Droganda Bokajula So adep so kajula manam Jupatin no nam tarjin jilo Jen lop gong ki kampar sung pajen Se nor kun la cha jen he padang Se dir du ta chu pe kom chen la Nikurjen pa me parjin jilo muku kongi go or sum parjin menga tergo je pe lama la jundu so wade pe kom chen la Chumi mugu ke wa jin jilo yang me kong gi ngu jir sum pa jin gan shar to pe ngo wo so ma de ma chu de kar job pe kom chen la gom jalo dan dra war chin jilo nam tok ngo wo chu kur sum pa jin Chiam hayin chir yang char wala Magaro parchar we kom chen la Corde hier me to parchin jilo Ke wa kun tu yandala madang Drao me chu ki pa la long chu ching sa da lang gi yen ten rab so ne Dorje Changi Gopan Yer Tosho Dorje Changi Gopan Yer Tosho. Okay, next we'll recite the prayers of taking refuge and engendering the Bodhisattva mind. Well, this will be recited 3 times. Or Sanjay Chudan Sochi Chonamla Changchu Pardu Dani Kyapsuchi Daji Jinso Jipe Sunamki Drola Penshir Sanjay Druparsho Sanjay Chudang Sochi Chonamla Changchu Pardu Dani Kyapsuchi Daji Jinso Jibe Sunamki Drola Penshir Sanjay Druparsho Sanjay Chudan Sochi Chonamla Jangchu Pardu Dhani Kyapsuchi Daji Jinso Jibe Sunamki Drola Penshir Sanjay Druparsho. Next, we'll recite the 4 immeasurables. And I think this one I'm going to do in English just to be different and to give us a sense of where we're starting our talk tonight, which is here. May all beings gain happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free of suffering and the cause of suffering. May all beings experience great joy, free from suffering. May all beings come to rest in the great equanimity, having the same great love for all. And we'll recite this 3 times. May all beings gain happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all beings experience great joy, free from suffering. May all beings come to rest in the great equanimity, having the same great love for all. May all beings gain happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free of suffering and the cause of suffering. May all beings experience great joy, free from suffering. May all beings come to rest in the great equanimity, having the same great love for all. And then I'll recite this short 7-branch prayer in English. I dedicate whatever merit has been accumulated through homage, offering, confessing, rejoicing, exhortation, and requesting to the Buddhahood of all beings. Okay, thanks very much. Now I'm going to recite a short prayer of my own, and then having recited that, we'll begin. O Palden Sawe Lama Rinpoche, Dagi Chi War Pede Den Shula, Kadrin Jembo Kone Je Sunte, Kusum Tuging Udrup Sal to Soul. Okay, thanks everyone. Well, this we've had a really good discussion in class thus far. We've talked about the foundational level of Buddhist teachings. We've talked about interdependent origination. We've talked about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We've discussed the 4 immeasurables and the 6 perfect virtues. And tonight we're going to be talking about Bodhicitta. This hopefully will set up the next conversations on relative and absolute truth, but we'll see. We'll see how it works. Earlier today, I decided that it might be a useful thing to create a handout for this class. And I'm going to use this handout that I've created as a bit of an anchor for the at least the initial part of our discussion of bodhicitta. And I remember hearing about bodhicitta for the very first time, probably somewhere around 1978, when Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche gave a very brief but powerful teaching on mind training to a small, I guess you could call it, family group of the Columbus Karma Take Some Choling members gathered in the den at Kay Adams and her husband Jerry Adams' home, and in North Columbus. And it was like a family meeting. It was like a family gathering, in that Khenpo Rinpoche was giving us what I felt was grandfatherly advice about how to use love and compassion to transform the mind. And that was when he taught us the love and compassion meditation known as sending and receiving for the very first time. And it was quite a revelation for all of us. It was as though our grandfather was imparting to us some very precious information that would be valuable to us for the rest of our lives. And sure enough, it was exactly like that, because learning about bodhicitta for the first time, hearing about it, knowing that it exists, knowing that it is a crucial and important part of our Buddhist path, everything changed after hearing about bodhicitta for the first time, because we had all been practicing the chant of the Om Mani Padme Hung mantra, the Chenrezi compassion mantra, for some months as our weekly practice. But we had not heard about the transformational nature of bodhicitta, and it was a delight for us to actually be hearing about this almost for the very first time. So I don't know that I can give you any of that grandmotherly advice as we got from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, but I hope that this evening's talk about bodhicitta will inspire you to learn more. I apologize to Yunten before the talk, because I think I have at least 6 book recommendations for you. These may be books you already have and have already read, but even if you haven't read them, they'll be valuable additions to your understanding of bodhicitta. So I think I'd like to let's see if I can do the magical screen sharing. Cross your fingers here. See if it will work. Yep, here it is. Okay. Our prayer is that Microsoft Word holds up tonight. Let's see. Whoop, it's not working. Well, then let's do that again. My goodness. Here I thought I was doing it right. Let's stop the share and try again. Oh, I see that situation. Okay, yeah, I picked the wrong screen. I love learning, and every time I use my computer, I learn something new. Let's start at the beginning, because all of you already are familiar with basics of Buddhism and understand this quotation from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. I'll put quote marks around it. He said, "The purpose of all the Buddha's teaching is to help us tame our minds." And he said that the reason for this is because our mind is like a horse, he said. He said, if the horse that you own is very well trained, this horse will do great work for you and be of great service to you. However, if your horse is not tamed, it could actually it could cause you a lot of heartache and trouble, and even endanger your life. So he said it's really, really important for us to first work on taming our minds as a means of practicing the Buddhist teachings. And then the other thing that I think I'd like to mention here at the beginning is that the teachings of bodhicitta are all in keeping with the basics of Buddhism, including the Four Noble Truths. And I like to always review them at the beginning of these talks so that we can connect Bodhicitta with the Four Truths known by the Noble. We all understand that these four truths are suffering, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the solution of suffering, and the path that leads to the solution of suffering. And so we all understand that suffering is part of life. We have physical suffering, we have mental suffering, we have emotional suffering, we even have spiritual suffering. And we've all experienced these forms of suffering in our life. The Buddha's teaching is that this suffering, the cause of this suffering is not something outside of us. It's actually coming from within. And he pinpointed the cause of suffering as clinging and fixation. Some people use the word desire, and that's a fine word, but I like the word fixation and clinging. I like those words better because they imply a certain willfulness to the action of grasping. And what do we grasp? We grasp people, we grasp ideas, we grasp situations, things, and we grasp them very tightly. And in holding onto them so tightly, we suffer. Why? Because if we work really hard to get something and then we don't get it, we feel disappointment. If we get something we really want and then lose it, we feel deep disappointment. And in fact, you could say even that gaining temporary happiness, the temporary happiness is suffering because of the truth of impermanence. That happiness is not going to last. And because that happiness doesn't last, we suffer. But of all the things we cling to, the thing we cling to the most, according to the teachings of the Buddha, is our concept of self, our ego, our me, our I, me and I. And we fixate on it as being permanent, endless, real, unchanging. And by grasping onto the self in this way, we suffer every other kind of suffering that comes from clinging. And so if the cause of suffering is this ego fixation, and ego fixation is the worst of them all, well, then we have to do something about that, don't we? We have to do something to bring about an end to that ego fixation. And so the solution to suffering then is to let go of all of the kinds of clinging that we experience. Well, that's easier said than done. Anyone who's tried to give up a bad habit knows what this is like. First, you recognize the bad habit, then you give up the bad habit, and then you suffer because you've given up your bad habit, and then you grab the bad habit back and do it again, and then you feel bad because then you gave up on your attempt at self-improvement. So in all of these various ways, we have a difficulty in letting go, even if it's letting go of the thing that's making us suffer. And you can't very well say to another person in your life who is suffering, oh, just let that go, like it's that easy. So what we have to do first is we have to learn how to let go. We can't just let go of clinging and fixation, particularly to the self or I. There's an article I'm going to share with you in a little while by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, who gave a talk on Bodhicitta a number of years ago at Columbus KTC. And he said, when we encourage people to let go of self, I, or ego, he said, people get a little scared. He said, because they think that this means that they won't be taking care of themselves anymore and that they will suffer because they no longer can take care of themselves. But Rinpoche said that's not the case. We're not being, he said, yes, of course, the sutras and the other Buddhist texts are full of examples of beings who gave up many things, perhaps even giving up their flesh or their life, but to benefit suffering beings. But he said, we're not being asked to give at that level, not right away. The way he put it is, he said, we're being asked to give what we can as we are able. I'm going to repeat that. We're asked to give what we can as we are able. So that means that where we are today may be a lot more selfish than we want to be, but we can make small, gradual improvements in this selfishness over time by learning how to let go first in very simple ways. You'll get a kick out of this story. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, when he first started teaching us in Columbus, I think he despaired at first because we were quite confused about everything. And he had to give us, shall we say, training wheels on our bicycle of Dharma to make sure that we wouldn't fall over. And so, for example, he said, if you've got a problem with letting go, he said, I think you should start by doing something simple. He said, why don't you feed the birds? He said, feed the birds. The birds, you put seed out on the ground and the birds come and they eat it, and they don't come and knock on your door and tell you thank you for the seed. So then you get used to giving something without being thanked. And he said, so this can be a very easy initial way to practice letting go of something. And he said, in some of the Buddhist texts, he said, there's even a training exercise for learning how to let go by a person putting an object that they treasure in one hand, thinking this is me, and then they open their other hand thinking it's another person. And then they practice giving their precious thing to another person by moving it from one hand to the next. Talk about training wheels. That's pretty simple. But I think that for us, there are easier ways to learn how to let go. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So, if the cause of suffering is fixation and clinging, the solution is letting go, but we need to learn how to let go. And so he teaches the how to let go through the path to the solution of suffering. The Eightfold Noble Path is a bit of a long teaching, so we'll just summarize them in the 4 statements made by the Buddha. He says, do no harm, practice virtue, tame your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Well, that last phrase means that this is it, folks. There's nothing more. This is it. So that means we can discount that for the moment and just pay attention to do no harm, practice virtue, and tame the mind. Do no harm means to not hurt yourself and not hurt others. Practice virtue means to take care of yourself and benefit others. And tame the mind, it means to meditate. And for many of us, the practice of quiet sitting meditation, sometimes called tranquility meditation, or shamatha in Sanskrit, or shine in Tibetan. This very simple practice is, for many of us, our first experience in letting go. Shamatha begins the process of learning how to let go. When we train our attention and use gentleness to train our attention, this gives us the gift of spaciousness and non-reactiveness. And so I want to take a second to talk about this. And everybody understands how shamatha works. You sit quietly on your meditation seat and you observe the breath as it comes in or goes out. Or you place an object on the table in front of you and place your visual attention on that item. Your eyes can look at that visual item literally forever, but your attention will eventually wander, become bored, and wander off of the item. And the same is true for breath awareness. when you practice breath awareness, as the breath comes in and goes out, sometimes we'll be captivated by a memory or a thought and be dragged into the past or projected into the future or start going around in circles in the now. But the instruction that's given for working with your breath and meditation is you notice the distraction. You can even label it thinking. You consciously let go of that distraction and consciously, with the utmost gentleness, replace your attention again on the breath, if you're practicing breath awareness, or the object on your table, if you're practicing visual awareness. So for most of us, our very first experience, powerful experience with letting go, happens when we let go of distractions in meditation. This is because we're often captivated by memories of something pleasant or memories of something horrible, or worries or concerns about the future or even the now. And being able to notice that we are no longer with the breath or no longer with our visual object, we notice this. And then through the wonderful skill of noticing, labeling, and dropping the thought, we then can gently, with love and without criticism or self-judgment, bring our attention back to the breath and think of it as a fresh start. In this way, through practicing gentleness with our breath and gentleness with our attention, this and with the visual object, when we practice gentleness, we teach ourselves how to let go. The letting go is so simple and so easy, especially when we use the gentleness. If we use judgment, if we're harsh with ourselves, if we say, oh, you're a bad meditator, you're never going to get this meditation thing, it's always going to evade you or elude you, that's not really constructive. And in fact, it adds another layer of discursive thinking. First, you have the discursiveness, then you catch your discursiveness, and then you get mad at yourself, and that's not helpful. So you also have to let go of self-judgment. So I think that learning how to let go doesn't have to be something complicated. It's something we practice on our cushion over and over again. So in any case, I just wanted to bring that up so that you didn't have to think that learning how to let go was something hard. It's something you've been doing for a very long time anyway. So let's move on and see how the practice of shamatha helps us. Everybody who does shamatha, they tell me like two things. They say, wow, I didn't know I had that many thoughts until I started meditating. And it's Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was asked about this, and he said, well, it's not that people actually are having more thoughts. He said they're actually just noticing their thoughts for the very first time. And then there are two other things that people bring up after they've been meditating for a short time. They'll come to me and they'll say, wow, I didn't realize how much nasty thinking I do. The person actually is noticing the content of their thoughts, not just that they're having thoughts, but they're noticing the content. And this, one of my friends who went on to live at KTD Monastery, Michael Duran, he was one of the secretaries of KTD Monastery and lived there for many years. He told me once when he first started meditating, he came to me after a few weeks and said, wow, he said, I used to think I was a pretty compassionate guy, but then I started noticing my thoughts when I wasn't meditating. And I realized, wow, I'm not a very nice person at all. I'm thinking badly about other people, or I'm thinking badly about myself. And these are the thoughts I'm like feeding myself every day. And so this is the second thing that people begin to notice when they've done shamatha for a while. They notice their individual thoughts, both on the cushion and when they're not meditating anymore. And additionally, the third thing that people say after they've been meditating for a while is related to the second one. They say, oh my gosh, I have accumulated so much bad karma through my habits. I have so many bad habits and they have accumulated so much bad karma. What am I going to do? All of these are normal outcomes of doing shamatha meditation, and we should take them in stride and recognize that every single person who's ever learned shamatha goes through this as part of the process of learning how to tame the mind and let things go. But here's the thing. It's the shamatha is sort of like the pacification. It allows us to have spaciousness around our thoughts. In other words, at first we have lots and lots and lots of thoughts, but then they become fewer and fewer and slower and slower. And what we notice is that there's a lot of space around thoughts, especially if we begin to let them go. And what we find when we're not meditating is that things that used to bother us a lot don't bother us so much. And that things we used to react badly to, we don't react in quite the same way. So in a way, training our attention through this letting go with gentleness, it gives us a gift. And it also allows us to see and possibly even let go of thoughts we are having when we are not meditating. And if we can interrupt one thought, whether it's on the cushion or off the cushion, what this means is that we can actually begin to change our habits, because our habits and our personality are all made of those thoughts, which are discontinuous. When you let go of one thought, you see that it really wasn't that much anyway. It didn't really have that much power or strength. And when you let it go, sometimes it just disappears entirely. And when this happens, it gave me a feeling of power, like, wow, I can actually begin to change my habits because I can begin to let go of some of these thoughts that have plagued me for so long. But it isn't just being able to let go of a negative thing. It's also being able, on the one hand, you're learning to let go of things, but on the other hand, you're learning to do healthier things. For example, learning about ethics and morality, learning about good karma and how to do good karma and bad karma and how to avoid bad karma and how to replace negative thoughts with more positive ones. And what we find is that shamatha is both about letting go, but also taking hold, letting go of that which is not worthwhile and taking hold of what is genuine. So in Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's presentation of Bodhicitta, he talks about shamatha and its ability to pacify our mental afflictions and our patterns of ego fixation that cause harm to us and that cause the ego fixation that cause these negative afflictions and patterns which cause us so much harm. But Rinpoche said, even though these mental afflictions are pacified, he said they're not uprooted. And since they're not uprooted, they kind of remain below the surface of our mind. And that when the conditions are right, our negative mental afflictions can arise automatically. I use the example of weeds. Every part of the country has some form of weed. Out east here, and in the Midwest, we have dandelion weeds, which some people, of course, recognize as a medicinal plant and good food source. But many people find them to be troublesome because it crowds out plants they want to have in their yards. And so they have to kill these weeds. And many people start by cutting the dandelion plant and at the ground, but they leave the root in. And everybody who's a gardener knows that if you leave the root of a dandelion in the ground, when the next big rain comes, that root will sprout forth another weed. And it's very much like that with our mental afflictions and our habits of mental afflictions. part of the reason that it is so hard to let go of them is because just merely pacifying them through shamatha isn't enough to remove these patterns. The patterns still remain below the surface of our mind. And when things go wrong, those patterns will jump up again, just like the dandelions after a rainfall. And so what Rinpoche said about this was that he said, for this type of problem, you need to have the other skillful means of Buddhism. And so this is where we learn about the practice of bodhicitta. So to uproot these mental afflictions, we have to use the other skillful means of the Buddhist teachings. And to this end, we give rise to the mind of awakening, or bodhicitta. Sometimes called the enlightened attitude, bodhicitta is a gradual wearing away of our ego fixation and its associated patterns. And believe it or not, this is how bodhicitta is why bodhicitta is so powerful. It's because it gradually wears away and eventually uproots our ego fixation and its associated patterns, so that we don't even experience the arising of some of these liberated and purified mental afflictions. Now, you've already done a lot of study of Buddhist history, and you've studied the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. And so I don't need to give you much of a history lesson. The historical Buddhist Shakyamuni, he taught methods of generating and training in bodhicitta. And then great Dharma practitioners of the past took these teachings to heart, used them in their own lives, transformed their own minds, became enlightened beings themselves, and then expanded upon the teachings of the Buddha in great works such as Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva, and Ngudral Togme's The 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. This will be one of my book recommendations, is the Way of the Bodhisattva. There are many good versions of this. There's one that was recently published as translated by Karma David Chopel and Kempo David, and it's really a very good version of this. And I have a little fondness in my heart for the Padmakara translation version of it, published by Shambhala. So this is just a couple of examples. Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva has been translated any number of times, and so it's kind of you can take any one of them and read them and learn something from them. It's a 10-chapter book, and everyone knows the story of Shantideva, who was a monk living in India in the 8th century. And his fellow monastics thought he was a little bit lazy and a little bit stupid, so that when it came to be his turn to give a Dharma discourse, they wanted to embarrass him and possibly get him to leave the monastery because they thought he was so lazy and so stupid. They put him on a very high throne, and when he said, well, what would you like to hear? Would you like to hear a teaching from the past, or do you want me to give you an original composition? They all started laughing to themselves and said, yes, definitely an original composition. And so he began to speak what became known as the Way of the Bodhisattva. By the time he got to the 9th chapter on wisdom, he started to levitate off of his seat. That's the story, the way the story is told. And he eventually gave the 10th chapter from high in the sky. And I think they probably looked at each other and said, do you think we made a mistake about this guy? Anyway, Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva talks about all there is to know about bodhicitta. And Ngudral Togme, I'm going to place him somewhere between the 10th and 12th centuries. He was a great Tibetan master who studied the bodhicitta and practiced it to the highest extent, and himself was a great bodhisattva. And he collected all of his favorite bits of advice in this 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. So what is bodhicitta, and why is it so powerful? Well, the word Bodhi means awakening, and the word Citta means mind. So you could say that Bodhicitta is the mind of awakening or the enlightened attitude. But put simply, Bodhicitta is both the wish to attain complete Buddhahood and enlightenment for the benefit of both oneself and sentient beings. And it's also describing the practice by which that enlightenment is attained. In previous classes, you'll have heard the teachings that the Buddha said we all have Buddha nature, we all have Buddha potential and have the potential to awaken to our own Buddha potential and our own Buddha nature. So bodhicitta is how this begins for us. It's the wish to attain enlightenment for their benefit, for ourself and others, and the practice by which that enlightenment is attained. Well, how important is bodhicitta? I mean, it's part of the Buddha's teaching, but how important is it? Well, great teachers have extolled its virtues, and I'm going to give you a couple of quotations, both here and later on in the talk, about bodhicitta and how powerful it is. But we'll start with this quotation from the training text on bodhicitta, The Great Path of Awakening. And those of you who know me know that it's probably the only book I've ever read. And this is another book that's good to recommend for people who want to learn more about bodhicitta and its generation. So that is another book that's worth looking at. It's Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche of this book has said it is a complete path to Buddhahood. You need nothing else. So I'd take that. What do they say? I'd take that to the bank, as they say. Jamgon Kongtrul the Great, who lived in the 19th century, was a great Kagyu and Nyingma master. He said, there are no methods to effect the attainment of completely perfected Buddhahood other than those which rely on two types of meditation, and that they're both bodhicitta meditation. What are these two types of meditation? In other words, he's saying you can't become a Buddha. Let's clarify. You can't become a Buddha without bodhicitta. That's pretty serious business. So unless we learn and practice and internalize the teachings of bodhicitta, we cannot become a Buddha. So this is something worth paying attention to. There are two types of bodhicitta that are spoken of in the Great Path of Awakening. There's relative bodhicitta, which is training the mind and love and compassion. And that's what Jamgon Kongtrul says in this book. And he says the other type of meditation is ultimate bodhicitta, which he calls resting evenly in a non-discursive state, free of conceptual elaborations. In other words, resting in and recognizing and resting in the true Buddha nature of our mind. So Jamgon Kongtrul says that it's not easy. In fact, it's pretty much impossible for beginners to give rise to ultimate bodhicitta in their streams of being. But relative bodhicitta can definitely be definitely arise in our mind stream if we train in it. And then with the accomplishment of relative bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta can be realized naturally. So, these are quotations directly from Jamgon Kongtrul's Great Path. He also quotes Nagarjuna, the great Mahayana scholar from, I'm going to say 3rd century. I could be wrong about that, but I think he's 3rd century. Nagarjuna says, if the rest of humanity and I wish to attain insurpassable awakening, the basis for this is bodhicitta as stable as the king of mountains, compassion, which touches everything, and pristine wisdom, which does not rely on duality. So here he's talking about relative bodhicitta, compassion, and ultimate bodhicitta, wisdom, that is beyond duality. So bodhicitta is essential for anyone who wants to attain enlightenment. You can't get there without it. Bodhicitta accomplishes. How does bodhicitta accomplish our awakening? It accomplishes our awakening by gradually uprooting the main cause of suffering, ego fixation, and in its place, firmly planting the seeds of love, compassion, and wisdom. Instead of being egoistic beings out for our own benefit, we become bodhisattvas in training, gradually replacing negative mental afflictions with new habits of love and compassion. I tell people when they take on the bodhicitta practice that what they're doing is they're letting go of selfishness one little moment at a time while taking on the superhero secret identity of being a bodhisattva in training. A lot of folks say, well, if I don't have selfishness, how will I ever be able to take care of myself? But we will be able to take care of ourselves, plus being able to benefit others because we learn this boundless love, this boundless compassion, both for ourselves and for others through the practice of bodhicitta. Let's return to the outline. So at the beginning of the Great Path of Awakening, Jamgon Kongtrul writes a prayer asking for the blessings of the enlightened ones on his endeavor of writing the book. He, at the end of this verse, this set of poetry, he writes, I shall explain here the one path. There it is again. Bodhicitta is the only path to Buddhahood. I shall explain here the one path on which the victorious one and his children have traveled. Easy to understand, it is not corrupted. Easy to practice, it's entered with enthusiasm. Yet it is profound, so Buddhahood is attained. Easy to understand, it is not corrupted. What does this mean? This means that the various practices of engendering love and compassion, you can't mess these up with intellectualization. You know, you remember that line in the Mahamudra lineage supplication? We said at the beginning. There's one line, it says, grant your blessing that meditation be free from conceptualization. In another translation, it says, grant your blessing that meditation be free from intellectualization, which really takes the heart out of it. So that's why he says the practice of love and compassion, it's not corrupted because you can't intellectualize it. And it's easy to practice. Who doesn't love love? I mean, who doesn't love love? I remember Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche gave a teaching once that had a real unusual title. It was called How to Become the Darling of the World, which, I mean, it sounds a little bit hokey, but it's a wonderful teaching because he says everybody wants to be liked, loved, and admired. How do you do it? By being kind to others. By being kind to others, you yourself are shown to be a trustworthy and good person that other people can find, draw strength from. And people love to see you come in the door because you bring happiness to their minds. And he said, this is how you become the darling of the world, through love and compassion. So it's profound as well as being easy to practice because it uproots selfishness, love and compassion. I mean, as your love gets bigger, your selfishness gets smaller. It's just science. You replace one thing with the other. Then, lest you think that that you're going to get bored after you become a Buddha, Jamgon Kongtrul sets that to rest. He said, even when full Buddhahood is attained, there's nothing to do except work for the welfare of others with non-referential compassion. This can kind of be fun. I know that very few of the teachers in this program have probably referenced the television show The Good Place, but just, bear with me for a second. The very ending of this sees beings who thought they were in heaven go to hell and then be completely liberated from all concepts, and they become kind and loving disembodied beings who run around helping others. I think it's a lovely, it's fictional, but it's not too fictional if you're a Buddhist. So I love the whole idea of people working in the background of our lives, trying to help us and benefit us. So that'll probably be the only reference to the good place you'll hear in the entire level 2 session. So there you go. I do recommend it if it is binge worthy. So it says even when full Buddha has attained, there's nothing to do except work for the welfare of others with non-referential compassion. Okay, but I have to tell you one more thing that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said. I was able to be part of the group that hosted him and Trungpa Rinpoche for a lunch one day at Columbus KTC. And we were sitting around the table, a bunch of us KTC friends, talking with them. And Khenpo Rinpoche said the most astonishing thing. He said, once you've taken the Bodhicitta commitment and committed yourself to developing and engendering and developing bodhicitta, he said, you will never be bored ever again in your life. Never be bored ever again in your life. He said, you'll be so busy working on your own transformation, transforming your own mental afflictions, working on your own negative patterns, or you'll be busy looking for opportunities to help other beings. He said, so you're never going to get bored ever again. And I must say that I have found I have found this to be true. All right, moving on. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, Bodhicitta, that comes from the Sutriyana. That's really inferior to the Tantrayana." It's the Tantrayana is superlative and it's superior to the Sutrayana practices. So Bodhicitta, that's just for beginners. Well, unless you think that Bodhicitta is just a beginner's practice that you can cast aside when you enter the Vajrayana, our masters tell us that Bodhicitta is crucial for all Dharma practice to be successful. He said, without Bodhicitta, if you don't have the Bodhisattva motivation when you do your Vajrayana practice, he said, at best, your Vajrayana practice will do nothing. That's at best. And at worst, he said, you will accomplish your own disaster. And this is because bodhicitta is essential in doing practice for the right reason. Because frequently, we think of ourselves as Mahayana practitioners who have the good of all sentient beings in mind, when we're probably mostly motivated by our own self-benefit. So we're sort of more like Hinayana practitioners, only working for our own liberation. And so we have to slowly change this tendency and this habit of being Hinayana practitioners practicing the Mahayana. And the other thing we have to look out for is we have to look out for only partially practicing bodhicitta, not fully practicing it. When Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was teaching us how to teach new people in Dharma, he made a point of saying that when a person is interested in Mahamudra practice, which you've already heard about in these classes as being the highest meditation practice of our Karma Kagyu lineage, when people approach Mahamudra practice, it's an incredibly transformational path. And Rinpoche said before a person even begins to do the Mahamudra preliminaries, he told me, you have to train them in the 7-point mind training. It's crucial. He said that before they start their Nundro, they have to study 7-point mind training. He said the reason for this is that if they study 7-point mind training thoroughly, they will be able to set aside their own selfishness in their practice and be able to accomplish even more with their practice more effectively because they're not doing it just for themselves. So that's another piece of information. We'll call that Buddhist news you can use. So, okay. how powerful is bodhicitta? I mean, isn't it just a wish? And I mean, kids have wishes. I wished for a pony. I mean, hey, even kids have wishes, but is it like the wish to gain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings? Isn't that sort of a childlike wish? And how powerful could that be? Well, in the first chapter of The Way of the Bodhisattva, Shantideva says, except for perfect bodhicitta, there is nothing able to withstand the great and overwhelming force of evil. Those of you who want to look that up, that's verse 5 and 6 of the first chapter. It's the powerful one. It says, as when a flash of lightning rends the night and in its glare shows all the dark black clouds had hid, likewise rarely through the Buddha's power, virtuous thoughts rise, brief and transient in the world. Wow, doesn't that feel like right now? Doesn't that feel like the darkness that we're encountering in the world right now? Well, chapter 1, verse 6 takes that and turns it over. Thus, he says, behold the utter frailty of goodness. I mean, if he had only said verse 5 and not said verse 6, this would be a very depressing first chapter, because it's very rarely, he says, that virtuous thoughts arise in this world. Then he says, verse 6, thus behold the utter frailty of goodness. Except for perfect bodhicitta, there is nothing able to withstand the great and overwhelming strength of evil. And so basically he says bodhicitta wins. If there is a battle between good and evil, bodhicitta is how good triumphs. So it's something worth noting, especially in these difficult times we're living in. Then, later in chapter 1, Shantideva says, should bodhicitta come to birth in one who suffers in the dungeons of samsara, in that instant they are called a Buddha's heir, worshipful alike to gods and humans. For like the supreme substance of the alchemists, it takes the impure form of human flesh and makes of it the priceless body of a Buddha. Such is bodhicitta. We should grasp it firmly. So if you've learned about alchemy, the idea is that back in the Middle Ages, or in that particular time period, there were people who ran around using a special substance that was called the philosopher's stone, that they could use to turn base metal into gold. And so this is why alchemy is used as the example here. We are ordinary, confused, benighted beings, and yet when we apply bodhicitta, love and compassion and wisdom and emptiness, when we apply this to our being and fully internalize it, we transform ourselves from ordinary into the extraordinary body of a Buddha. Now, also in chapter 1 of the Shantideva book, he says there are two aspects to bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, the awakening mind, is said to have two aspects. First, aspiring bodhicitta in intention, and active bodhicitta, which is practical engagement. So aspiration and action. Wishing to depart and setting out upon the road, this is how the difference is conceived. But wise and learned thus should understand this difference, which is ordered and progressive. In other words, how does aspiration lead to action? Wishing to depart is the example of aspiration, and setting out upon the road is the action. This is how the difference between aspiration and action bodhicitta is conceived. For many of us, bodhicitta begins as a simple, almost childlike wish. May all beings be free of suffering and its causes. as you know from the other classes you've received, we pray for beings not just to be free of suffering, but also from its causes, which are negative actions, going all the way back to the earliest teachings of the Buddha, when he said, when we think, speak, and act with an impure mind, suffering follows us. And when we think, speak, and act with a pure mind, happiness follows us. So this aspiration can be formalized in a ceremony of taking the Bodhisattva vow. And if Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche recommended that people take the Bodhisattva vow at the very least one time, and if from the practical point of view, for as many times as possible, he said, if you have an opportunity to take the Bodhisattva vow, even though you've taken it before, you should take it again, he said, because we are different when we take it a second time and a third and a fourth. But whichever way bodhicitta is engendered, our lives change from the moment that we take it. Khenpo Rinpoche not only said that we would never be bored again, he actually said all of your relationships, once you've taken the bodhisattva commitment, all your relationships become extra meaningful because you have dedicated yourself to liberate all sentient beings. So everyone who sees you, even if they hate you, they are benefiting from that. And in fact, this is mentioned in the aspiration chapter in Shantideva's book. This is in chapter 3 on commitment. This is chapter 3, and it says, let's see, all those, this is verses number 16 and 17 in chapter 3. 16 says, if those who see me entertain a thought of anger or a thought of devotion, may these states supply the cause whereby their good and wishes are fulfilled. Number 17, all those who slight me to my face or do me any other evil, even if they blame or slander me, may they attain the fortune of enlightenment. So this is extremely helpful for us, because I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I've been in a situation where people gave me I guess what kids would call the stink eye. They kind of look at me badly, or they think badly of me, or they criticize me or something like this, and I feel bad. Well, the good news is even that person who told me I was bad is actually now connected to me, so that when I become an enlightened bodhisattva, I'll be able to help liberate them. So this is very helpful in helping me to get through some of the things that I think we all go through as humans. Later in chapter 1, Shantideva keeps talking about how wonderful bodhicitta is. So you have to forgive me because I just love these verses. Bodhicitta in intention, that's our aspiration bodhicitta, bears rich fruit for those still wandering in samsara, that's us. And yet a ceaseless stream of merit does not flow from it alone, for this will alone arise from active bodhicitta. So just having the idea is not enough. We have to put that idea into action. It won't create a ceaseless stream. For when, with irreversible intent, the mind embraces bodhicitta, willing to set free the endless multitudes of beings, at that instant, from that moment on, a great and unremitting stream, as a strength of wholesome merit, even during sleep and inattention, rises equal to the vastness of the sky. So we've got a lot to look forward to if we practice bodhicitta. Action bodhicitta is, of course, carried out by the 6 perfect virtues, or paramitas, which you learned about in another class in this series. The word paramita means going to the other shore. And if you remember from the other class that you attended, the 6 perfect virtues are generosity, ethics, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom. And the way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva offers chapters many chapters that are devoted to inspiring descriptions of the paramitas and how to practice them. We won't go into this now because it was covered very completely in your other class, but just briefly, I like to try to remember the 6 perfect virtues because one leads to the other. Those of you who have studied the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, this is yet another book that's being recommended. There's a wonderful newer translation of this called the Precious Ornament, the Ornament of Precious Liberation. But I've got a fondness for this older translation by Khenpo Kunchok Jaltsen because there's like a lot of stuff in the back. Where he tells the life story of Gampopa, for example, and he also provides capsule versions of the stories from scripture that are mentioned in Gampopa's book as illustrations for the points he's making, like the story of Angulimala, the story of the king Krika's daughters, and so forth and so on. So some of these illustrative parables are told in the back of the book so that you don't have to go figure out what they mean. So that's another good one to think about. Generosity is really letting go. And it leads to, and when we let go, it's easy to be ethical because you're not in it for yourself anymore. You're in it to benefit others. And when you're generous and ethical, it's easy to be patient because you're not so worried about your own situation anymore. And if you're generous and ethical and patient, diligence, that's a snap because you know what's valuable. And that is your Dharma practice. You know to be diligent in your practice. And when you're generous and ethical and patient and diligent, well, then meditation, it couldn't be simpler. And you couldn't be more motivated to do it. And if you do all of these things, then wisdom is the result. So that's a little bit about the 6 perfect virtues, which are action bodhicitta. Now, again, you learned a lot about this in the other classes, so I don't need to go into it. But if you want to understand a little more about about ultimate bodhicitta, because relative bodhicitta, love and compassion, is just one phase of bodhicitta. The other is ultimate bodhicitta. You can learn about it by reading the Heart Sutra and commentaries on it. My favorite one, unfortunately, is out of print, but maybe you'll be able to find one online somewhere. The Profound Wisdom of the Heart Sutra by Bokar Rinpoche. I'm sorry it's out of print. It's a marvelous little tiny book that helps us to understand the ultimate view of the Heart Sutra. So, and then also you'll be able to understand more about bodhicitta by reading Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's, sorry, this is the old edition, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's book, Dharma Paths, which has a really complete description of bodhicitta and how to practice it in the chapter on the path of the bodhisattvas. And let's see, I've got several more. No Time to Lose is Pema Chodron's commentary on the Shantideva way of the bodhisattva. And so that's a wonderful commentary, which helps to explain everything except chapter 9, which she does not comment on. I don't think I could teach chapter 9. So I think there are many, many great books that have been written about chapter 9. So we'll let the experts explain that. So, these are a couple of things to mention to talk about bodhicitta. And there's one more thing for me to say about bodhicitta, which is not mentioned in my outline. So I'll take a moment to talk about it now. And this is the transformational aspect of bodhicitta. If you've studied or practiced Lojong, such as in the book, The Great Path of Awakening, you'll know that there's a powerful practice that you learn in training in bodhicitta called Tonglen, or Tong is the Tibetan word for send, and Len is the Tibetan word for take. So sending and taking. It's a form of meditation that was spoken of in the Buddha's teachings in a general way, but which is taught a little more completely by Shantideva he calls it exchanging oneself for others in his book, The Way of the Bodhisattva. But it becomes even more crystallized into the form we know it today in the works of the great Indian master Atisha, who lived in the 10th century in India, who made a very arduous sea voyage to Indonesia, where he met Dharmachakra, the Dharmachakra of Indonesia, who we call, in Tibetan, we call him Ser Ling Pa. Ser means gold, Ling means island, and Pa is person. So the person from the Golden Island. He lived in the area, he's said to have lived in the area around Borobudur, the great Buddhist complex in Indonesia. So Atisha makes this arduous sea voyage, goes to study with Serlingpa for 12 years and learns all of the techniques of exchanging oneself for others that Serlingpa had to teach him. Then he gets back on the boat, goes to India, lives in India for a number of years and teaches these techniques, and then gets invited to Western Tibet, where he goes and spends the last 17 years of his life there, teaching refuge, bodhicitta, and the mind training that he learned from Serlingpa. And so this Tonglen practice is a very powerful way to experience the feeling of the enlightened attitude. It's a way of training the mind in the enlightened attitude. My favorite instruction on this, on Tonglen is in Dharma Paths. It's on page 118, 119. I don't have enough time to share that with you this evening, but he gives an extremely simplified method of practicing Tonglen, where there's no preparation. You would start your practice with taking of refuge and engendering the bodhicitta attitude, but then you would begin with the out breath, thinking that as you breathe out, that you give goodness to all sentient beings. He uses the example of like the sun shining. And I think when he says that, I think of the sun spilling out over the hillside and filling the valley. He said, you think that you give all of your goodness on that out breath to all sentient beings. And that on the in breath, you think that you remove from sentient beings all of their suffering, all of their difficulty, all of their negativity, and that by removing it all from them and taking it in, this removes all of the suffering from sentient beings. And then Rinpoche said something really interesting. He said, because of the power of bodhicitta, remember the power, bodhicitta is more powerful than evil, remember? So he said, because of the purity of the bodhisattva motivation, he said, as soon as all of this negativity merges with you, it dissolves into nothing and disappears. He says, it's as though you got a little pile of dust and a strong wind blew it away. And so he said, in this way, you breathe out goodness to all beings and breathe in and remove their suffering. He said, but you don't do it for very long. You do it for just a brief period of time. I tell people start with just a few minutes and see how that is, because it's better for it to be brief and genuine than to be lengthy and discursive. And then what Rinpoche tells you to do, and again, this is all in his book, Dharma Paths. He said, when you have finished doing this Tonglen practice, he said, you let go of the mental focus. In other words, you release the visualization and you let it go. And in letting it go, he said, you let your mind rest in a place that is beyond sending and beyond receiving, and in a place that's effortless, where there is no you, no them, no saving. It's all beyond all of those things. It's transcendent. And so in this way, he gives us this ultimate bodhicitta exercise to do at the end of our Tonglen. And so I think that in this way, it's a marvelous way to practice this very simple exercise to train in an experience of the bodhicitta mind. He said, it's great to have an intellectual understanding of bodhicitta, but he said you really need an experience. And so he encourages everyone to do Tonglen regularly for that reason. In a short article that I'm going to share here just briefly, if I can. Yeah, okay, good. I'm going to share something else that Rinpoche taught. It's in an article that's called Tonglen and using Tonglen in daily life. He talks about Tonglen, and then after he talks about it, he says Tonglen minimizes and gradually uproots conflicting emotions and engages us physically, mentally, and verbally in accumulating merit and developing tolerance. This explains the expression, enlightened beings have reached enlightenment by working for the benefit of all sentient beings. Sentient beings remain in samsara because they are working for themselves alone. By letting go, we work to benefit others rather than working merely to benefit ourselves. But then Rinpoche goes on to talk about the other transformational aspect. Remember that Shantideva called it like alchemy, the alchemy of our experience? Well, Rinpoche goes on to explain how that works. He says, Tonglen is not just for when you're sitting in meditation. It should be a part of your life, wherever you go, whether you live, work, or eat. He said, when you walk, you should review these thoughts in your mind. May all beings experience happiness. May I take upon myself the suffering of beings. I mean, you can also think such thoughts as, may everybody who sees me see the Buddha, see my teachers, see something good. And when you inhale, you think, may I be able to take on others' sufferings. And when you exhale, think, may I be able to give others merit and happiness. And then he says, in fact, you can use your own conflicting emotions to practice Tonglen. The text on this practice, which is our favorite, The Great Path of Awakening, gives a slogan about this. 3 objects, 3 poisons, 3 seeds of virtue. When training the mind as beginners, Rinpoche says, we still have neurosis. We have neurotic thoughts, but we must know how to handle them. The text implies that we can transform conflicting emotions into virtue, but how? He says, first, we must apply mindfulness. For example, the moment we are aware that we're experiencing anger or another conflicting emotion, we should think, may I experience the negative mental affliction of all sentient beings, and may all sentient beings be free of these types of afflictions. Then he says, the emotion itself is not positive, but the way you've handled it is positive. And you've actually accumulated merit. Then he said something. So this particular teaching just changed my life. There was my Dharma before I learned this and my Dharma after learning this. It was a powerful change for me, and I'm hoping that it will be for you. Because look what he says next. This may be describing someone you know. Similarly, when you make a mistake out of confusion, instead of giving yourself a hard time, you should accept the mistake and realize that it arises from the confusions that come from negative karma. Think, everybody has made these mistakes. So now I take on all of their confusion. So even if you make a mistake out of confusion, that mistake can become an object of virtue. In short, you try to make it a habit to think of other beings' welfare and practice accordingly. You have to be able to practice everywhere. When you're practicing anything, meditation, a sadhana, or whatever, think, I am practicing to benefit living beings in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. You can even transform your sleep into the practice of virtue. This is helpful for people like me because I can fall asleep at the drop of a hat any time of the day. It's a skill that's not always helpful, but I use it. He says, Rinpoche says, if you go to sleep thinking, I will help living beings in your sleep will then actually benefit living beings. But you have to remember to do this every time you go to sleep, even when you wake up during the night and then are returning to sleep. He said, since we need a technique for generating merit in everyday life. I mean, even if we can't sit down and practice, he says, if we can think of others, we're practicing. If we enjoy a meal and think of sharing the joy with others, that's practice. I mean, the way I practice this is when I'm happy or comfortable, I think, wow, may all beings have this happiness. May all beings have this joy. Then he says, in this way, every activity of life can become your practice. So we must immediately share any happiness and joy we feel and immediately take on the suffering of others when they're upset. And so Tibetans are trained to think, if something makes me happy, may all beings share in this happiness. If I meet circumstances of suffering or frustration, may my suffering and frustration eliminate the sufferings of all sentient beings. In this way, Tonglen is the origin of innumerable, immeasurable merit, and by practicing it, we break through fear and we break through ego clinging. With it, we become courageous and tolerant and become willing to work for the benefit of others. So I just had to share this teaching, apologize for reading it to you, but it's just, Khenpo Rinpoche's language was so helpful that he helped us to feel like we could do this, that we could transform our lives. And so it's something that it was really powerful for me, and I just had to share it. A lot of people say, oh, I wish I could practice more. I wish I could sit on my cushion more. In fact, I'll never forget the one guy who came to the question microphone, and I can't remember if this was in a Dharma talk by me or if it was in a Dharma talk by Rinpoche or someone else. But the guy said, hey, I could really practice if it weren't for my family. I could really practice. I'd have a lot more time if I didn't have to take care of my family. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is tough. And I believe this was Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, because he said something to the effect of, we think our daily life is over here and our Dharma practice is over here, but we have to like blur the line. We have to eliminate this line, thinking, oh, everything on my cushion is great and everything in my life is terrible. We have to actually merge the two. We have to actually begin to transform our experience of daily life by bringing the Bodhisattva motivation to our daily life. And the practice of Bodhicitta is how this is done. And I think, and so I'm hoping that this encourages you to learn more about Bodhicitta and to learn more about how your everyday life can become practice. It's a powerful thing, and you find yourself thinking of the benefit of beings even when you're not practicing. So in any case, I have to tell, hey, Yenten, I got done.
Hey,
Yenten and I
I,
were talking ahead of time, and I said, I think I'm going to finish at 9 o'clock, but here I am.
I've been putting links to the books as you mentioned them in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful. Sorry, I do tend to go on, but I get excited when I talk about Bodhicitta, because Rinpoche himself was always so animated when he talked about the promise and joy of practicing Bodhicitta. So because of time, we have to stop here for this evening. But I want to remind everyone to, if you have questions from tonight's talk, please write them down and I hope you're keeping a notebook with your questions as the lectures go on, and that you'll get an opportunity on June 19th to do another Q&A. We did one for the first part of the class, and now we'll do another one on June 19th for the second part of the class, and you'll be able to ask questions of as many teachers as can come to the question session. I really enjoy, I'm so happy that you're here. And I'm so happy that that you've taken this course, and I invite you to just keep going back over the materials, learning and practicing. And I make the aspiration that all of us attain Buddhahood at the earliest possible opportunity, and that we then emanate in all places and benefit sentient beings. Let's dedicate our merit. Yunten, will you show us the prayers that we're going to recite here? And I wish all of you the best. And let's see if we can dedicate. This is a very Bodhicitta thing to do, right? Bodhisattvas dedicate that merit. Okay, so we'll start here with this prayer and go to the end. Gathering together all the goodness of this session, we dedicate it to all beings' attainment of awakening. O gyal kun ninche razu karma pa, gyal kun trin le chi du karma pa, gyal kun dun so huang kur karma pa, or gendro du trin le shap ten so. Sunam dehi tam che sit pani, Tom ne ne pedranam pam jene, ke gana chi palap drupai, si pe sole dro ardro, nuradro shok, jampal pa wo ji tarken padang, kuntu sampo de ante jinte, de da kun ki jesu ta lop ching, ge wadi da tam che rap tu ngo, Sanjay kusum ne pe jin la tang, Chuni min den pe jin la tang, Gendun mi che dun pe jin la ki, Jitar ngo wa men lam dru par shon. Du ji le jiao jiao wei trin le pa, Karma ba ten ten pei nim po di, Cho tar kun chap chap chi jun mi che, Ta para pel pel wei tara shi shon. Okay, everyone. Thanks again for being here tonight.